This is Gail Morgan welcoming you to the Libertarian Counterpoint. Now, your host, James Just.
Welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am James Just, and with me today is Michael Graves. Michael, the Fox Dominion case and settlement that is being, has it been settled, or are they just kind of decided that they're going to settle and decided not to go to court? It's kind of in this weird limbo section at the moment. But legal experts are wondering if this is going to come back and bite places like CNN, MSNBC hard. Because Fox is not the first company who has gone through this, right? CNN just had their own lawsuits that they've settled. MSNBC has had the same type of issues before. And all of a sudden now with Fox, it's become this big, huge news. But how long can they ignore the other issues that other media organizations have been having?
Absolutely, James. Great to be back on with you. This is an interesting one, I guess, in relation to some claims that were run on Fox News during the election, during the heat of the campaign. Fox has now settled with Dominion. Dominion Voting Systems, of course, makes a whole bunch of the voting machines. And so they, there was like a $1.6 billion claim against them from Dominion, kind of suing for defamation, and Fox has now settled for some significant fraction of that, several $100 million. And you have absolutely some right-wing and conservative, kind of both pundits and legal experts coming back and saying, well, this is a ridiculous legal standard to have, that the press is running, allegation, that they're not even, that they're repeating allegations that were made by someone else, and that they're being held civilly liable. They got to pay damages for that, and that it's defamatory. They're saying, well, look, if what's good for the goose is good for the gander, if we're really going to have that standard now, like there's all kinds of crazy stories that have been promulgated by left-wing media. Some of the ones they point out were, it was like Russiagate and these things, and the Hunter Biden laptop story where they're like defaming the computer technician, saying that he, he's like a Russian spy or puppet or something, he's, part of a Russian plot. And there's, of course, this comes back and it turns out there's absolutely nothing behind it, that's, that would be, by this legal standard, that would be considered defamation. So it's certainly interesting to watch this happen. My opinion is Fox shouldn't have settled. This is a crazy legal standard that, it's sort of an interesting question. Should the press be allowed to make statements that do damage someone's reputation, kind of in but they're not even making it's like, what limits should there be on what the press can do legally? It's an interesting question. I think that we've had a free press, a relatively free press in this country for a very long time, and that the standards are the way they are and have been. For a reason. Who's
that young man? I forget the young man's name who CNN defamed, and he went and sued him and they settled a sizable chunk of money. Oh, Sands something. I forget what it was.
I don't know.
He had the protest in Washington, D.C., and they defamed all those kids a couple of years ago, and the young man sued.
Oh, you talking about Nicholas Sandmann?
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. He actually got sued by who?
He sued CNN.
He sued CNN.
And he settled. For the same, it's essentially the same thing. It's defamed.
Sure.
And they settled. But also, this brings me back to, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, where the Democrats and the left and the media were, what was the other one? Diebold, who did a bunch of voting machines.
That's right.
When the voting machines went to
they're one of the voting machine companies.
When the voting machines went to the Republicans, it was the Democrats were perfectly fine, defaming the voting machine company. But now all of a sudden, when it goes their way, it's
I think it's just this question, what legal standard are you going to have? I think in the Nicholas Sandmann case, I would actually say that was a different situation where he really kind of was defamed in the very strict sense of the word, where it's not just, like they went and said, you're making racists, they made claims that you can't even substantiate with the video evidence that the claims were based on. That's like the video evidence, if you review it, clearly contradicts the claims they were making, and he's saying I was damaged by that. I think that's true. So I think they're kind of different cases and different standards that you would apply.
Yeah, but the question, my point is that the left's media, now all of a sudden they're getting all over Fox when and fair enough, Fox is not my favorite news source. I don't watch any cable news. But at the same time, you've got these other news organizations who get away with the same type of behavior,
right?
Essentially, and it's not even necessarily to get away with it legally. They get away with it socially, on the social aspect, right? Fox, everybody's throwing Fox under the bus, but no one throws MSNBC.
They're easy to throw under the bus, but
MSNBC or CNN, which should be just as easy to throw under the bus. Kyle Rittenhouse, there we go.
Sure, yeah.
There's another example of how the media can.
Yeah, I mean, they just in that particular case, they just it was all portrayed in the media that he's Rittenhouse is crossing state lines with the weapon. He's clearly going to be found guilty, and then when the evidence is actually reviewed, it doesn't go that way. And people who actually watched the trial, it was very rapidly apparent that a lot of the claims that were repeated in media were just nonsensical. Actually, it's just that they're just omitting completely facts that are pertinent to the claim of whether this was self-defense or not. So there's a lot of things like this going on, and
yeah, and we've seen this before. We've seen Rachel Maddow and the guy on Fox News, what's his name, Tucker Carlson, has both had to go into court and admit their shows are entertainment, not news.
Right, but the question is, is it really acceptable to, legally police what claims, what the press is allowed to say, or would we maybe be better off knowing that, people in the news media are going to say nonsense a lot of the time and make crazy claims, and it's kind of buyer beware.
Yeah, well, it's always been buyer beware. When the First Amendment was written, the press was actually literally just the printing press. You could go down, get your flyer printed, and you'd stand out on the corner and hand out your political flyers. That was actually the freedom of the press. Right. This notion, one of the biggest propaganda victories the press has ever had, the media has ever had, is this notion that the press is a news gathering organization. Right,
and that that their claims are substantiated. They probably never really have.
It's never been, but the press was never about a professional news gathering organization. It was about individuals having the freedom to literally print your ideas and reproduce them and distribute them. That was the
spread the word about
that was freedom
of the goings on.
Yeah, about the freedom of the press, not corporate news gathering organizations have some special privilege that the rest of us don't have. That's not what freedom of the press is. Freedom of the press is we individually have the right to sit here, and if someone wants to listen, we can speak. And that's what freedom of the press is supposed to be. So, I don't know. We've gotten far away from what the actual meaning of that is. Again, simply from a propaganda aspect. The media that's one of the most successful propaganda things.
Yeah, I mean, I would really say that we should have a very strict, that there is such a thing as news organization defaming someone, and that should have a pretty strict standard. And I don't particularly like how this kind of opens the window for any connected interest, anyone powerful with a complaint, to go and try to silence the media. I mean, media, press freedom has been important at certain times. You have the Pentagon Papers, leak, and it's a very important tool in the toolbox of a free society.
We were talking with a libertarian philosopher a few weeks ago on another podcast, and he actually had to sue the media for defamation, even though he doesn't believe in defamation. He says my reputation isn't owned by me; it lives in somebody else's mind, and I don't have ownership of that. But in the modern society, the only recourse he actually had was to actually go and sue them and make them get a settlement.
Yeah, you kind of have
and so you kind of have to accept the roles.
Work with what you have in the society that you actually live in.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
You got philosophically, we shouldn't. You shouldn't, philosophically, your reputation is not yours, it's somebody else's mind. But, realistically, in the modern world, it's kind of what we have to do. Okay, so in Chicago, last weekend there was a disturbance, we'll call it, because it wasn't quite a riot. I don't know if I'd quite.
That was really distressing to see. Those videos.
Those videos, you had a bunch of young people got together and essentially destroyed a couple blocks of Chicago.
I think I witnessed, I think I saw some just assault and just violence against people.
If you happen to be on the street and you
beating this guy, I mean, that's really horrible.
And they destroyed all kinds of stuff. And then the new Chicago mayor, not yet in office, but the newly elected Chicago mayor says he shouldn't demonize those kids out there.
Yeah, that was
destroying the neighborhoods.
Something.
And the old mayor, she's still mayor, she essentially said the same thing, that somehow it's not the fault of these kids. Well, it has to be the fault of these kids, but it also has to be the fault of these children's parents. Even if they're not there, it's still their responsibility. At some point, we have to hold, it's not necessarily, I don't know, I have a problem. We're sitting here holding mayors and politicians accountable for issues that are actually
it's not
cultural.
Really, the mayor can't really.
You can't. The mayors can't go into neighborhoods and tell people you need to raise your children properly. I mean, you can kind of from the bully pulpit, but you can help create the conditions where people are more likely to try to raise their kids properly. And I think that's one of the things we've lost in these last couple years, and why society seems to be decaying, is that we no longer respect each other. And the policies no longer respect us as individuals. And so if the policies don't respect us as individuals, why would individuals respect policy? Mm-hmm. And so we're wondering why there's a lack of civilization, a lack of humanity out in the world kind of decreasing. Well, I think COVID and the response to it show that there's a lack of humanity in our public policy. And that has to have an impact on the outside. And so I don't know, it doesn't seem to me that telling people who are destroying your neighborhoods that we shouldn't demonize them because they might destroy our neighborhoods more. I don't even know what the line of thinking is on this.
Well, I think that this guy that I don't even know his name, but it's the new mayor of Chicago,
mm-hmm. Something Johnson, I think.
Johnson, right? And so he won the recent election. They removed Lori Lightfoot, and she. I think just did not do at all well in the primary, I guess. Yeah,
she got primaried out.
But there's this kind of idea that there was a moderate candidate who was running, like kind of still a Democrat, but a much more moderate Democrat who's kind of like like more of like a public safety, law and order type a little bit, and let's change what we've been doing versus this guy Johnson, who really ran as like, okay, like. I'm a progressive. I'm way over on the left, and I understand, that, we got to govern progressively, and that ideology involves this concept. And I do think that there's something to it. Like if I hear someone say, let's not rush to demonize these people committing violent acts. That is meaningful to me. I don't think that's just like totally empty, but I don't think it absolves you can't absolve individuals of responsibility for the acts that they commit, good or bad, and certainly not for criminal acts against your neighbors and violence. And it's it's one thing to kind of talk about let's not demonize violent people and try to understand where they're coming from. That could certainly be productive, but it is a little distressing to me to have the people who are in charge of public safety, kind of prioritizing that line of thinking. And with Chicago in the state that it's in, when I really think there could be a lot more public safety and that these things could be done better, that the first thought is not for the victims of the crimes and the violence, but for the perpetrators. I think that is the type of thinking, when it makes its way up to the governance and policy level, that really has some of these left-wing cities not in such a good place.
Because they're not actually balancing the needs of all their students. All their citizens. Yeah, maybe that's a Freudian slip there. They're not actually considering and balancing the needs of everybody, right? They're putting one group of people's needs higher than the others. In this particular case, they're putting people who are maybe rightfully so, have lost hope, and so that lost hope is showing up in socially unacceptable ways. But the average citizen who's just trying to go about living their lives and not committing acts of violence, those are the people that actually you have to have not a lot higher than everybody else, but a little bit higher. People who don't commit acts of violence must be considered better citizens than people do. I mean, that's kind of the line. The line of civility is acts of violence, correct? That's what you can...
Absolutely. And yeah, I also think that it's just human to, I don't care what walk of life you're from, people will do behaviors that they'll continue to do behaviors that they don't receive any negative consequence when they do them, and they'll do less of the ones where they do receive negative consequences, and that's why you want to have consequences for people who are violent. You can't just have no consequences at all. And I do think that you think about like the January 6th, the riot on Capitol Hill, and I think some of those folks were kind of basically weren't violent and were kind of engaging in political speech, and I'm not sure what penalty there should be for them, if any, but some people were violent, right? And folks like the mayor of Chicago would be the first to say, like, oh yeah, you really gotta throw the book at those guys. They injured a police officer, but when it's a group of teenagers and they harm your neighbor, I don't see why it's a different response.
Yeah, it's the lack of accountability, and accountability isn't always punishment, but you just do have to be accountable. And we're going to move on to about a lack of accountability. A freshman Democrat in Washington, D.C., he dares to tell the truth about the outrage politics. This was an interesting video.
Yeah, that was...
He released I think it was on Twitter, video, and he says, all those outrage politicians who, they go on to their committee meetings that are aired on TV, and they all get outraged, and they have all this stuff.
Yeah.
He goes, behind closed doors, they are completely different. They're completely rational human beings. You can actually have a genuine discussion with them. But the minute those hearings with the TV cameras come on, it becomes outrage politics. So the minute they're talking to the public, it's outrage politics. But behind the scenes, it's normal politics.
Now, yeah, so that video, that I guess he's a Democratic congressman from I think North Carolina. That was interesting. That went really wide. It got a lot of views, and I think my response is kind of like tell me something I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I already knew that it's political theater, and I have just been watching what they do in Washington D.C. for long enough to understand that large, well over a 50% majority of these things that they're saying is political theater. It's for the benefit of the public. It's not what they actually think. But this thing got a lot of traction because I think a lot of people don't really, realize that, and they take it at face value. And yeah, no, it's completely true. You can just kind of see it in the outcomes of when the policy actually gets made, right? I mean, this stuff like, the Democrats, they really hate the Patriot Act, right? And then they, this is back in, George Bush, and then Obama gets elected, the Democrats control Congress and the White House, and the Patriot Act stays in place because they never really believed what they were saying in the first place, right? There's some true believers, it's kind of like a minority, and you can actually, if you go look at their votes, you can figure out who they are. That's why I really liked Ron Paul, because he was sincere, right? And there are Democrats who are sincere too, at all times. There's never that many of folks in any of these categories, and a lot of people. The guy in his video, he says people respond to incentives, and the politicians are incentivized to keep you angry because that's what gets your attention, that's what gets you voting, right? And they're not incentivized to go find solutions. And so what you get is this, outrage machine.
Well, you get the outrage machine because the activists send money when they're outraged, and so that's why when you sounds like these groups of politicians, Democrat, Republican politicians, any politicians really, they're talking to a narrow audience. It's because they are talking to a narrow audience. They don't care about the
Right.
people who aren't going to get outraged, who aren't going to send them money. They care about the groups of people who will send them money, and they're going to worry about the rest over on election season for those 4 months that they're running for office every 2-6 years, depending upon their office, right? They don't actually. It's very difficult. I don't want to say they don't actually care. It's very difficult to tell what a traditional politician actually cares about, which in some ways is good, right? Because in some ways, if you're a real, genuine traditional politician where you're actually considering all the needs and trying to balance all of them, it's an impossible task. You actually probably should know exactly what a traditional politician means, because it's not actually relevant exactly what his positions are, because his position is going to be different because it's not him, it's his constituents, and trying to balance all the needs of the constituents. So the fact that so many politicians have these hard-coded ideas about what they want to accomplish, what they want to do, is actually part of our problem.
Yeah, I think we need to go one deeper here and just really make the point, right? That okay, there's certain issues where the left really hates the right, and the right really hates the left. These guys hate each other's guts. There's a few issues, and some of that is sincere, and then there's a lot of grandstanding, and we got to have. How do I put this? It's so what, like the kind of stuff they're going to get really angry about, and it's like half sincere, right? Is gun control? It's kind of a current issue, but it's how many more children need to die before we implement common sense gun control, and then it's like, well, they're going to take our guns, and we gotta we can't let them do that. There's bad people over there, and they fight, right? And then another example would be they get really upset about taxes, right? And it's like taxes on the rich, like it's really but when it comes to certain, I would say the more important issues, such as how much is the government going to spend, like just the entire budget, they're in lockstep. Right? You don't have to wonder whether they're getting along behind closed doors. No one ever gets out of line. They always approve the next budget. There's like a few people who get, wrangle at the margins, and they get roped back in, and the bigger, and then they go and spend more of your money, and they inflate, and there's never any serious pushback. So there's no serious division about that. On the issue of war, overseas wars, essentially almost all of which have been, I haven't seen any justification for no first act of aggression from the country where U.S. military is going to war. These are bipartisan affairs. They're in agreement.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is when we are outraged, we're not thinking. We're making decisions based upon emotions, and political decisions based upon emotions end up with bad decisions, right? Because you're not actually contemplating.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, how would you, if you and I, James, wanted to resolve, some actual issue or dispute between us, or something we were dealing with in our personal lives, maybe we're business partners and we have something that comes up, we wouldn't go and, go through this political process and find like the two things that, we hate each other's guts about the most, and throw eggs at each other until one of us buckles or something. I mean, this is a crazy
no, because what in the real life, when you have a severe disagreement, you actually try to remove the emotion from it and say, okay, how can we actually think about this logically? Let's remove the emotion, and let's try to work through this without the emotion. Right. Emotions are good for telling you what you need to work on, but they're terrible for telling you how to work on it, right?
Yeah.
They're good for so I think that's one of the things we need as a society to kind of contemplate more. And in a way of that, Morgan Freeman had a discussion. Someone asked him a question about racial politics, and he says he's insulted by Black History Month and being called an African American, because he feels as an American, and he feels his history is all history. And this is not actually new. Morgan Freeman has said this repeatedly.
No, I think he's been saying this for quite
a while.
Some time.
But it seemed to strike a nerve this time.
Yeah, definitely.
And it seemed strange to me that it would strike a nerve this time, rather than not necessarily all the other times.
Sign of the times. It's people are getting more sensitive about these kinds of cultural, racial, and identity issues. So there's a just very, I would say, very clearly very heightened sensitivity about these sorts of things. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting what he had to say. That's it's a transgression, right? That there really is this sort of there's a party line. It's not even necessarily the Democratic Party line, but it's sort of like I don't know what to call it, like the social justice, racial and identity politics party line. It bleeds over into the right wing a bit as well, which is, just all these things that you have to do these things this way, or else you're not in conformity, and you might be racist. I might have to think about that one. And here's Morgan Freeman, and he's just like totally. It's a complete transgression, right? What do you mean you don't agree with Black History Month and you're black? Like how can you even say that? Is what these folks are thinking. But I think his argument makes a lot of sense. He's saying that it's kind of he says it's like kind of offensive. Finds it offensive that Black history is considered separate from American history, and that this is kind of ridiculous if you actually think about it.
Yeah, and you can understand his point. I personally wouldn't go as far as I have interracial children. My children are part Black, and so we've had this discussion. We raise them as human beings because we figured being multiracial, the only way out of that, if you try to,
I'm a multiracial child, so
it's being multiracial. It's raising them as human beings seemed to be the only answer for us. And, and we grew up in racially diverse neighborhoods, and so it was really the only answer for us. So, and it seems to me that that's kind of what the direction Morgan Freeman wants to think about.
Yeah, and they're complicated issues. Everyone's got a different life experience. There you have, you're going to have a right to think these things through on your own and figure out how you feel about it. What kind of upsets me about being woke and this kind of identity politics party line, like I was kind of saying, is that it's that it doesn't allow for deviation, that you can't think things through on your own and come to a little bit different, or maybe quite a bit different, principled response. That no, it's this way is the right way. That it's the woke mob. I mean, I think it's a real thing. It's the woke mob has kind of figured out that it's going to be these are the things we're going to do, and if you don't do them, then like I said, maybe you're racist or something. And I don't think that's real. Like I don't think it's the real world.
Yeah, but
when you're doing that, it's
if these people are calling people racist who aren't racist, goes back to the top of the thing. Is this defamation? Are these issues for? As eventually, are people going to start suing people from the woke mob and defaming them?
I certainly hope not. I think after a certain point, you just have to say, words can never hurt me, and and move on with your life. There's always going to be someone on the street corner saying something crazy.
Right. Yeah. You just wonder where this. We're at the point where is it going to get worse?
That's the idea with the freedom of the press. That the antidote for someone spreading lies or something that's easily refuted, or that there's nothing backing it up, is not to say, oh, you're not allowed to say it, right? It's we don't place restrictions on the press and on speech. That's what free speech and freedom of the press are. And the antidote is more truth, right? Like more people. Okay, we're going to go look into it on our own. We're going to spread. We figured out that this set of facts is what actually happened, and this thing that this guy's saying is not correct, and then we're going to go talk about it.
And we are out of time. Thank you, Michael, for being with us today.
Thank you, James.
Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Access Sacramento.
Thank you to
the staff. And we will be with you next week. Please remember to love everybody, and good night.
Thank you to the viewers. Have a great night.